Welcome Junior Takis. My name is Mrs. Ramlal. This is a video I have prepared for the grade 12s to help them with their final exam preparation. In this video, we'll be looking at the Limpopo Prelim 2020, the paper 1. Right. 1-1. 1-1, we're looking at terminology where they'd ask you to provide the correct term for the following definitions. Right. The condition caused by an undersecretion of growth hormone in children. So what's our key word here? Undersecretion of growth hormone. So what's the condition called? That, of course, we know is dwarfism. 1-2. The tube that connects the pharynx and the middle ear, very important. This tube you must know and know how to spell. It's the eustachian tube. 1-3. The structure that provides nutrients to the developing embryo in oviparous animals. So what structure provides nutrients to the developing embryo in an oviparous organism? That we know is the yolk, right? Okay. 1-4. The structure at the tip of a sperm cell containing enzymes which makes contact with the egg cell during fertilization, that we know as the acrosome. 1-5. The watery fluid that supports the cornea and the front chamber of the eye. Watery fluid. Fluid is associated with aqueous humor. 1-6. The system of the body composed of glands that secrete hormones responsible for chemical coordination. Composed of glands that secrete hormones responsible for chemical coordination. Very important. They're talking about hormones, chemical coordination. That can only be the endocrine system. 1-7. The hormone that prepares the body for action in an emergency. That is, of course, adrenaline. 1-8. The maintenance of a constant internal environment in living organisms. That we know is homeostasis. 1-9. A series of changes that take place in the shape of the lens and the eyeball in response to distance of an object. When distance is measured, we know that is always accommodation. And the gland that secretes prolactin. What gland secretes prolactin? That's the pituitary gland. Make sure that your terminology, your words, your terms are spelled correctly. Okay, right. 1.3. Indicate whether each of the statements in column 1 applies to A only, B only, both A and B are none. Of the items in column 2, what must you write? A only, B only, both A and B are none. Right. 131. A plant defense mechanisms against pathogens. So against pathogens, we know thorns cannot help there. So your answer can only be chemical, so it's B only. A type of development resulting in offspring that are capable of moving around soon after hatching. That can only be, of course, precocial. So your answer is what? B only. And 133. Used by plants to reduce the chances of being eaten by herbivores. Now, this question I've seen many times. So what is used by plants to reduce the chances of being eaten by herbivores? It's both thorns and chemicals. So your answer is both A and B. Right. 1.4. Study the diagram of the male reproductive organs below and answer the questions that follow. 141. Give the letter and the name of the part that regulates the temperature of the testes. That you know. And you can see is labeled. That's D. That's the scrotum. Give the letter and the name of the part that secretes an alkaline secretion which neutralizes acidity of the vagina. That we know. And we can see it's A, prostate gland. Make sure you have the letter and the name. 142. Name 2 accessory glands that are not labeled in the diagram. So if you look here, you can see the prostate gland is labeled. Here's the prostate gland. The 2 that are not labeled, of course, is the seminal vesicle and the Cowper's gland. The Cowper's gland is not in this diagram. So, then, 143. Name 1 corresponding function of parts B and C. B is the vas deferens, C is the urethra. So we want a function that what both of them do. And both of them transport semen. And you're not allowed to, the memo clearly says not urine, because the vas deferens does not transport urine. So it's only semen. Okay. 1.5. The diagram below shows the growth movement of a part of a plant towards the stimulus. 151. Identify the stimulus X. Now, here, if you look at the memo, it says the diagram is ambiguous. So they accepted the answer as the stimulus was gravity, sunlight, or radiant energy. Right. 152. What growth movement is represented in the diagram? Now, depending on what the learner wrote, if the learner wrote sunlight, the answer would have been phototropism. If the learner wrote gravity, the answer would have been geotropism. 153. Define the growth movement mentioned in 152. So that also depends on the learner's answer. So if the learner spoke about gravity, it would have been the upward growth of plant shoots against the gravity. So that's what's happening here in this picture, where the upward growth of a plant shoot is against the force of gravity. So that's negative geotropism. Or, depending on the answer of the learner, if he spoke about light, growth of shoots in response to the stimulus of light. And then 154. Explain why the hormone that causes the growth movement in question 1.5.2 is used specifically on leafy weeds as a herbicide or a weed killer. Now, they're talking about auxin. So what auxin does, it stimulates growth by cell division and cell elongation. And what it does, it will cause the weed to grow faster, which will increase the rate of cell respiration, and it will use up all its food and then it will die. Okay. Right. Let's get down to question 2.1. A scientist conducted an investigation on 3 people selected randomly to determine the effect of different amounts of whole wheat bread and sugar-rich soft drink on blood glucose level after eating and drinking. The participants requested to fast, that means not to eat or drink, for 9 hours before the investigation began. The duration of the investigation was a period of 24 hours. The procedure was as follows. At 5 a.m., the participants were given 400 grams of whole wheat bread and 300 ml of cola to drink. At 11 a.m., the participants were given 200 grams whole wheat bread and no cola to drink. At 5 p.m., the participants were given 800 grams of whole wheat bread and 1,000 milliliters of cola to drink. You can see that here in the table as well. The blood glucose levels of the 3 participants were measured each time before and 2 hours after eating and drinking. And here's the results recorded in the table. A fasting blood glucose level less than 5.6 millimeters or was 5.6 millimoles per liter, sorry about that, grade 12s, or 100 milligrams per deciliter is normal. So the MMOL is millimoles per liter. Right, so 5.6 millimoles per liter to 6.9 millimoles per liter, or 100 milligrams per deciliter to 125 milligrams per deciliter is considered pre-diabetic, while 7 millimoles per liter or 126 milligrams per deciliter is higher, means a person has diabetes. Normal glucose levels after a person should be less than 140. Normal glucose level after meal should be less than 140 milligrams per deciliter. Let's take some time. You must remember these numbers. These figures are important because we'll need to use that later on. Right. As you can see in the table, the results were recorded in the table and you can see it. It's before, after, at 5 a.m., 11 a.m., and 5 p.m. And for the participants, before and after. For this investigation, state the dependent variable. What are you measuring? Now, if you look at this passage here, it tells you the blood glucose levels of the 3 participants was measured. So what are you measuring? You are measuring the blood glucose levels. 212. Based on the data given in the table, which participant is suffering from diabetes mellitus? Now you look at your numbers here and you compare to the table. So remember, more than 126, that's what we're looking for. So, anything above 125. Let's look. It looks like Participant 1. Never rush into the decision. Think about it carefully. Look for your answer. And this information was not information to waste ink. It's for you. You need it. Alright, 213. State a reason for your answer. So why do you say it's 1? So fasting blood glucose level is 126. Right? Okay. After the person ate, look what the levels were. 142, right? 150 or 220. So you look here. So immediately it should be below 140. So we know it. So, and here it's good because the memo wants reasons from the table. So you must mention, give the reason why. Okay. So you could either went this way, you could have answered, or you could have answered with the second reason, or you could have just said the blood glucose level is higher than 140. For me, I was just looking at the 140 milligrams. So if you look at the memo, there's 3 different options. For me, I was just looking at the higher than 140. You answer and practice and get used to answering the way the memo wants. You never know. One day they'll just want one specific answer. So it's good that there's 3 different options. And there's a lot of information here to get you that answer. And you'll be able to explain it. 214. Name the hormone that the participant measured in 212. Mentioned in question 212 will need to lower the blood glucose level. So what hormone lowers the blood glucose level? We know it as insulin. 215. Why is each participant's blood glucose level measured before the investigation? Very important. That acts as a control. It's something to compare the blood glucose level before and after. Nice questions. 2.2. The diagram below represents an animal cell in the phase of meiosis. 221. State which phase of meiosis is represented in the diagram here. Now, if we look, we can see there are single chromosomes or unreplicated chromosomes moving to the opposite pole. So the chromosomes are moving to the pole, so it has to be anaphase. And it's single chromosomes. So that is anaphase 2. Give a reason for your answer. We already said it. Single chromatids, I would have said chromosomes, are being pulled to the opposite poles. 223. Identify part B. B is the spindle fiber. What's part C? That's the cell membrane. 224. How many chromosomes will be present in each cell at the end of the meiotic division? That's easy. 4. How many chromosomes will be present in the parent cell or were present in the parent cell before it underwent meiosis? 8. 225. State one place in the human body of a human female where meiosis will take place. Easy. Ovary. Could the cell, 226, could the cell represented in the diagram be that of a human? No. Then they're going to ask you why. Explain your answer. Because humans would have had 23 chromosomes at this stage here. Okay, or 46 chromatids. But this diagram only has 4 chromosomes of 8 chromatids, so it's not a human cell. Okay. 228. Identify one observable feature which indicates that crossing over has occurred. Can you see the chromatids have different colors? They have different bands of black and white on them. So they are different from each other or they are unique. Okay. 2.3. Study the diagram of a reflex action below and answer the questions that follow. So there's your reflex action in your picture. State parts A, D, and E. So A, can you see it's a swelling? That we know this is the dorsal part. So this is the dorsal root ganglion. It's a swelling, so we know it is the dorsal root ganglion. D. D we know is pointing to the neuron, so it's the motor neuron. And E. E is the muscle or the effector. I would have been specific and said striated muscle. Right. 232. Which part of the central nervous system is responsible for the action illustrated above? So this is control. This is the reflex action. What part of the central nervous system is controls reflex actions? The spinal cord. 233. State one function of each of the following parts, B and C. They want the function of B. Now B, can you see? It's a gap between the 2 neurons. So what's the function? B is a synapse. And the synapse allows the impulse to travel in one direction only. What's the function of C? Look at C. C is pointing to the connector neuron. So what's the function of the connector neuron? Transmits the impulse from the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. 234. Explain what the effect will be in the action shown in the diagram if a person is suffering from multiple sclerosis. Very nice question. Now, we know with multiple sclerosis, the myelin sheath of the neuron is damaged. That will slow down the transmission of the impulse. And what does that mean? That will mean slower reaction time. It can lead to injury or death. Right. 235. Explain why the brain is not initially involved in a reflex action as shown above. Now, why does the reflex action not directly involve the brain? Because the spinal cord shortens the reaction time, right? By sending impulses directly to the effector. Reflex action only involves the spinal cord. If the brain was involved, it will take too long, it will delay the reaction, and it will cause injury. Nice question this. Write this down in your special book so you don't forget it. 236. Explain the effect on the body if the part labeled D, which is the motor neuron, is cut or severed. If the motor neuron is cut, the person will be able to feel the stimulus or the pain. Okay? The sensory neuron will be able to transmit the impulses to the brain. However, there'll be no reaction that will take place. Okay? Because no impulse will be transported to the muscle or will be transmitted to the muscle or the effector. 2.4. The placenta serves as a barrier, preventing infections and harmful substances from reaching the developing fetus. However, some drugs and viruses cannot be filtered, putting the developing fetus health at risk. Recent studies in a certain country with a population of 38 million women gathered information on the number of women who miscarried as a result of pathogens, alcohol, smoking, and other factors. The results are shown in the table below. The cause of fetal death and the percentage of women who have miscarried. Here we have with HIV, COVID, SARS-CoV-2, alcohol, nicotine, and other factors. 241. They want you to draw a pie chart representing the results as indicated in the table. Now here you can have your calculations. You can see it's percentage. So it will be obviously for SARS it will be 3 over 100 times 360. For HIV it will be 5 over 100 times 360. Alcohol 35 over 100 times 360. Nicotine 40 over 100 times 360. And other factors 17 over 100 times 360. And you get your answers in degrees. Then you plot your pie chart. Here's your heading, percentage of miscarriages caused by different factors. Right. And then I would not write the letters in there, but this is the memo. I would use a key and write maybe N for nicotine on the side. Then you have A for alcohol. And then you don't write percentages in the pie chart. So here teachers will have a little transparency made to mark and put the sectors over the pie chart. Okay, so you've got marks for the type of the graph, the pie chart, the calculations, and the proportions. Right, now it says, name one other function of the placenta not mentioned in 2.4. Now, what are other functions that are performed by the placenta? Now, if you look at the memo, connects the fetus to the mother's blood supply, supplies the fetus with oxygen and nutrients, removes carbon dioxide and waste from the fetus back to the mother, and secretes estrogen and progesterone to maintain pregnancy. Okay, right. Let's look at question 3 now. Now, 3.1. Describe how the human body regulates the salt level in blood when it decreases below normal. So, we know the receptor cells are in the kidney. They detect the low salt level, and then the adrenal gland is stimulated to secrete more aldosterone. More aldosterone will increase the reabsorption of sodium ions from the renal tubules into the blood vessels, and the salt levels or sodium levels in the blood will increase, and the salt or sodium levels will return back to normal. 3.2. Name the type of feedback mechanism between the two hormones in question 3.2.1. That we know. They want the type of feedback mechanism. That is obviously a negative feedback mechanism. But before that, let's do 3.2.1. Mention the two hormones involved in the negative feedback mechanism. Thyroxine, thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH. 3.2.3. Identify the two glands A and B. A we know is the pituitary gland. B is the thyroid gland. 3.2.4. A hormone from gland A controls the secretion of a hormone from gland B. With regards to the above, explain why an undersecretion of the hormone from gland A can lead to increase in weight of the person. 5 marks. If there is less thyroxine, that will be secreted, right? Less TSH will be secreted, so there's less thyroxine. That will be secreted by the thyroid gland. There will be a decrease in the metabolic activity because the rate of cell respiration decreases. Less glucose is broken down, more glucose is stored, and that's why more glucose is stored as glycogen, and so your fat reserves will also increase. Okay, that's why the person increases in mass. Now, 325. 325 asks what a hormone is. But I seem to have not put the answer in here, but a hormone is a chemical organic substance produced in one part of the body but has its effect on another part of the body. You can always rewind the video or move the video a bit so you can write it down. 3.3. Describe how the different parts of the ear and brain allow for hearing to occur. Let's look at it. Sound waves are directed by the pinna through the auditory canal to the tympanic membrane, causing it to vibrate. The vibrations of the tympanic membrane are transferred to the ossicles in the middle ear, which will eventually cause the oval window to vibrate. This sets up pressure waves in the perilymph. Pressure waves are then transferred to the endolymph, which stimulates the organ of Corti in the cochlea to convert the stimulus into a nerve impulse. There's in highlight in bold here is the compulsory marks, which is then transported along the auditory nerve to the cerebrum, where sound is interpreted. Here, if you look, if the sequence is muddled and does not make sense, they must credit where it does make sense. So, and we do not credit that. If the sequence becomes correct again, then we resume credit. Right. 3.4. Study the diagram of a longitudinal section through a human eye below. 341. Identify parts A, D, and E. A, we know, is the sclera. D is the choroid. And E is the optic nerve. 3.4.2. Describe the mechanism that causes part C to change in size. So part C is the pupil. They're asking you what causes the pupil to change in size. Now they're not saying becoming bigger or smaller, so you have to mention both. So this is the pupillary mechanism. In bright light, the radial muscles of the iris relax, the circular muscles of the iris will contract, and the pupil will become smaller or constricts. In dim light, the radial muscles of the iris will contract, the circular muscles of the iris relax, and the pupil enlarges or dilates. Right. That was 3.4. Now, let's look at 3.5. Right, you look at the diagram here. 3.5.1. X. What pore is this here? That is the sweat pore. 3.5.2. Describe how the part Z plays a role in regulating the body temperature on a cold day. Right. So, how does Z play a role in regulating the body temperature on a cold day? Now, Z is the sweat gland. So they ask you how Z plays a role. So how does the sweat gland play a role in regulating the body temperature on a cold day? So on a cold day, the sweat gland will be less activated. Why? Because the sweat gland will receive less blood, will produce less sweat, which can you see is a compulsory mark. Less sweat evaporates from the skin surface, less cooling of the body, and more heat is retained. Right. Question 4. I still do the essays because the essays I usually have 3 parts, and each part can be broken down into a long question still in this current exam. Explain the structural suitability of the sperm for its function and describe its involvement in the formation of a zygote and development of the zygote until implantation occurs. So, first part, structural suitability of the sperm. There's it here. The front of the head of the sperm contains an acrosome, good, which contains or carries enzymes to dissolve a part into the ovum for fertilization. The nucleus of the sperm carries genetic material of the male or the haploid number of chromosomes. The middle piece of the sperm contains the mitochondria, which releases energy, which allows the sperm to swim. presence of a long tail allows the sperm to swim towards the ovum. Then the contents of the sperm, such as the cytoplasm, is reduced. It makes the sperm lighter for efficient movement. Right. Then it talks about fertilization. In the fallopian tubes, one sperm makes contact with the ovum's membrane. The nucleus of the sperm enters the ovum. Then the ovum's membrane becomes impenetrable to other sperms. The nucleus of the sperm fuses with the nucleus of the ovum to form a diploid zygote. This is called fertilization. And then we talk about events after fertilization until implantation. So here, the zygote divides by mitosis to form a ball of cells called the morula, which will then develop into a hollow ball of cells called the blastocyst to form an embryo. This will embed in the endometrium lining using chorionic villi. Now, this was a good essay question, which these 3 parts can be broken down and I'll be asked into small questions for you in your exam. So, thank you, grade 12s. Thank you for joining me and watching this video. Join me and watch all my other videos as well.